The estate sat on the edge of a Connecticut hillside, like something that had always been there, older than memory, quieter than it had any right to be for a house of its size. 23 rooms, 4 full staff quarters, a kitchen the size of a small restaurant, with copper pots that had not been used in months. She had not been home in 11 weeks. She returned on a Tuesday, which was unusual. She almost always returned on Fridays when the week had wrung everything out of her and there was nothing left to do but walk through the tall front doors and let the silence hold her. But her doctor had said something 3 days ago that she was still trying not to think about, and the city had stopped feeling like a place she could breathe in. So she came home on a Tuesday, alone, no driver, no assistant, no one warned in advance. The housekeeper met her at the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting good news and received something else entirely. The estate was in order. Of course it was. The grounds were trimmed, the floors were clean, the windows on the south wing were polished, until the afternoon light came through them like water. But there was a smell. It was faint at first, something warm and low moving through the air of the entrance hall, subtle enough that she almost dismissed it. She signed the delivery receipt the housekeeper held out, asked 3 questions about the week's maintenance log, and started toward the east staircase. The smell grew stronger on the second floor. She stopped at the top of the stairs. It was savory and slow, something that had been cooking for a long time, something with bay leaves and something deeper beneath that. A smell that did not belong to a formal estate kitchen 3 floors below and 60 feet away. It was coming from her bedroom. She set down her bag in the hallway with a stillness that the housekeeper, had she been watching, would have recognized as the stillness that came before something. She walked the length of the corridor without rushing. She did not knock. She opened the door to her own room and stood in the frame and looked at what was inside. He had pushed the small writing table against the far wall and set a portable burner on top of it. A covered pot sat on the flame, thin steam curling toward the high ceiling. He was standing with his back to her, stirring slowly, unaware she had entered, wearing the dark uniform of the household staff. He was new. She knew that much. The agency had sent him 6 weeks ago while she was in London, and she had reviewed his paperwork from abroad and approved the position with a single-sentence email. She had been meaning, when she returned, to let him go. The housekeeper had been difficult lately about schedules, and she wanted to simplify the staff. She had come home intending, among other things, to dismiss him. She opened her mouth. He turned. He turned, and for a moment neither of them moved. She had expected guilt. She had expected the particular collapsed posture of someone caught doing something they knew they should not be doing. The dropped eyes, the overquick apology, the hands moving nervously toward the thing they were trying to hide. She had seen that posture many times in many rooms. She knew how to respond to it. He did not give it to her. He met her gaze directly, not with defiance, not with performance, but with the calm steadiness of someone who had already decided what he would say and was prepared to say it plainly. He set the wooden spoon across the lip of the pot. He did not step away from the table. He did not try to cover anything. She was aware, distantly, that the smell was doing something she had not given it permission to do. It moved through the room the way a temperature change moves through a room, without announcement, without asking, simply present. Something with broth, something slow-cooked, something with time, she thought, and something underneath that she could not name, but that triggered, inconveniently, a memory she had not thought about in a long time. A kitchen when she was very small, a grandmother's kitchen, a table where someone had loved her without condition and without agenda, and had proven it, repeatedly, with food. She pushed the memory away. "What," she said, "is this?" Her voice was level. She had been trained, over the course of a long and successful life, to make her voice level when what she felt was not level at all. "I can explain," he said, "if you'll allow me." "This is my bedroom," she said. "That is a burner. That is a pot. Those are things that belong in a kitchen, which is a room on an entirely different floor." "Yes," he said. "You have been in my employ for 6 weeks. In that time, I have not been present in this house. You have had no contact with me. You have received your instructions from the housekeeper." "Yes," he said again. "Then I would like you to explain to me, in whatever words you feel are sufficient, why you believed it was acceptable to set up a kitchen in my bedroom and cook in my bedroom without my knowledge, my presence, or my permission." He did not flinch. He looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "Because you hadn't eaten properly in 4 days, and I didn't know another way to make sure you would." The room was quiet except for the thin sound of the pot. She had not expected those words. She could feel, somewhere in her chest, the place where they landed, and she did not like it. Not because what he said was wrong, but because it was specific in a way that required explanation. It required him to have known. It required him to have cared enough to act on knowing. She looked at him for a long moment. "How?" she said slowly. "Do you know anything at all about what I have or have not eaten?" He held her gaze and did not look away, which was itself an act of some quiet courage. Men in his position usually looked at the floor when she used that tone. He said, "I heard the doctor speaking with your assistant in the hallway outside the study 3 days ago. The door was partially open, and I was carrying linens up the east staircase. I did not intend to overhear." She waited. "He said that your blood work showed signs of nutritional depletion, that your blood pressure had dropped, that you had been managing on coffee and very little else. He said if things continued the way they were going, he would have to recommend a hospital stay." A pause. He sounded concerned. Your assistant sounded more concerned about the schedule. She felt something shift in the room's temperature, though the windows were closed and nothing had changed. The air simply felt different in a way she could not name and did not want to examine. "And you thought," she said carefully, "that this information, which was private, which was medical, which was none of your concern whatsoever, entitled you to come into my private room and begin operating a stove." "No," he said. "I didn't think it entitled me to anything. I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about the right way to handle it, whether to say something to the housekeeper, whether to leave a note, whether it wasn't my place at all." He paused again, and she noticed that when he paused, it was not nervousness. It was as if he was simply being precise, choosing the correct words. "Then this morning I saw the breakfast tray come back down untouched. Same as yesterday, same as the day before, and I decided that doing something imperfectly was better than doing nothing correctly." She looked at him. She wanted to say several things. She wanted to say that he had massively overstepped, which was true. She wanted to say that good intentions were not permission, which was also true. She wanted to say that she had staff, she had an assistant, she had a doctor on call. She had systems in place precisely so that a man who carried linens would never need to feel responsible for whether she had eaten. She wanted to say all of that. What she said was, "What is in the pot?" Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, not a smile, more like a careful adjustment, like a person who has been holding themselves very still and has been given permission, finally, to breathe. "Arroz caldo," he said. "Rice porridge, ginger, garlic, a little lemon. It's simple. It's gentle on the stomach when a person hasn't been eating. I made it for my son once when he was sick and wouldn't take anything else." He looked at the small pot on the stand. "You mentioned it once, months ago, when you came back from the Manila trip. You said you had eaten it there, and it was the first time in years you had felt properly warm." She had said that. She had said it to no one in particular. A passing remark, a fragment of a memory spoken aloud to an empty hallway. He had remembered it. She stood very still. The window behind him let in the late afternoon light at a low angle, and it caught the steam rising from the pot in a way that made the whole scene look unreal. Soft-edged, like something from a dream she had not had in a long time. The room smelled of ginger and garlic and something else underneath, something earthy and warm that she could not name and did not want to name because naming it would make it too real, too close. He had remembered it. She had said it to an empty hallway. She said many things to empty hallways. The house was very large, and she moved through it quickly, always moving, always composed, always producing the correct phrase at the correct moment for the correct audience. She was skilled at that. She had spent decades becoming skilled at that. A passing remark about a bowl of rice porridge in Manila was not a confession. It was not an invitation. It was nothing. It was the kind of small, unguarded moment that people like her did not allow themselves often. And when they did, those moments disappeared into the air without consequence. Except he had been in the hallway. She looked at him carefully for the first time since she had come into the room. Looked at him not as the problem she had intended to correct, but as a person standing in her bedroom, having done something that she genuinely did not have a framework for. He was not young, not old. There was something quiet and practiced in the way he held himself, the way he stood beside the small folding stand as if he had positioned himself to be as unobtrusive as possible, as if the goal was to make the meal visible and himself invisible. She asked, "What did the doctor say exactly?" He answered without hesitation, without calculation, without looking away. He told her the doctor had spoken quietly in the corridor, assuming no one was nearby, saying that the situation with her appetite was a concern, that the body would begin to compensate in ways that were not sustainable, that someone needed to make sure she ate something today, something gentle, something real. He used the word real, he said. I thought that was an unusual thing for a doctor to say. She thought it was unusual, too. She had not thought about it at the time because the doctor said many things, and she nodded at all of them, and then returned to her work. But real was an odd word, as if the doctor had known something she had not admitted, which was that the trays sent to her office were correct in every measurable way and meant nothing. She looked at the pot. He did not urge her. He did not gesture toward it or speak about it again. He simply waited, and there was no performance in the waiting. He was genuinely prepared to stand there until she decided, and equally prepared to take the whole thing away without comment if she asked him to. She pulled the chair out from her reading table and sat down. She pulled the chair out and sat down, and the small act of sitting felt strange, the way unfamiliar things feel strange when you have been doing them wrong for so long that you have forgotten what right feels like. She could not remember the last time she had sat at a table for a reason other than a meeting or a contract or a call she needed to handle while appearing to do something else. This table was small. It was the reading table by the window, a table she used for stacking papers she had not yet filed and books she had not yet opened. She had never eaten at it. She was not sure she had ever sat at it without a phone in her hand. He set the bowl in front of her without ceremony. It was a simple thing. White bowl, pale broth, soft shapes moving beneath the surface that she recognized as the vegetables she had mentioned once, in passing, to someone she had not expected to be listening. There was bread beside it, the kind that tore instead of sliced, set on a cloth rather than a plate. She did not know where he had found the cloth. It was one of hers, she supposed, from some drawer she had not opened in years. She looked at it for a moment. He had moved back. Not out of the room, but back to a respectful distance near the wall, which told her he understood that this was her space, and he was only a visitor in it, even having built something there with his own hands. The small pot was still warm on the stand he had assembled. The smell in the room was different now, quieter somehow. Less of the cold neutrality that expensive rooms carried and more of something she could not immediately name. She picked up the spoon. The first taste was not a revelation in the cinematic sense. There was no sudden understanding, no tears, no dramatic moment she could have described to anyone afterward. It was simply warm, and the warmth moved through her in a way that was entirely different from the warmth of the office, which was controlled temperature and had nothing to do with comfort. This was something else. This was the warmth of having been thought of, which is a different warmth entirely, and one she had not felt in long enough that she had stopped noticing its absence. She took another spoonful, and then another. She was aware that he was in the room, and she was aware that she was not bothered by this, which was itself a thing worth noting. She was a woman who was bothered by most people being in most rooms she occupied. She had spent considerable effort ensuring that her spaces were empty of anyone whose presence she had not precisely requested. Yet he was there, and she was eating, and the two facts existed together without friction. She did not speak. Neither did he. She ate half the bowl before she realized her shoulders had dropped from the position they held when she was bracing, which was the position they held almost always. She set the spoon down without meaning to. It was not a decision. Her hand simply rested, and the spoon rested with it, and she sat looking at the bowl in the way a person looks at something when they are trying to understand what has just happened to them without quite being willing to admit that anything has happened at all. He did not move. He remained at the edge of the room where he had positioned himself when she began eating, far enough to give her the privacy of not being watched, close enough that she could speak to him if she chose. She had not chosen. She chose now. How long did this take you? The question was not what she meant to ask. She had meant to ask something more practical, something with a logical answer that would fit inside a reasonable conversation. But that was the question that came out, and she let it stand. "About an hour," he said. "Maybe a little more. The stock needs time." She looked at him then, fully, in the way she had avoided since she walked through the door, and found the impossible. He was not remarkable to look at. That was the thing. He was simply a person, standing in her room, holding his hands loosely at his sides, because there was nothing left for them to do. "You heard my doctor," she said. "I wasn't trying to." His voice was level, not defensive. The door was open and I was in the hall. I wasn't listening to anything that was said, but I heard that. She understood that he was telling her the truth, not because she was an especially charitable judge of people, but because she had spent enough years surrounded by people performing honesty to recognize the difference when someone simply had it. "I mention food in passing," she said. "I mention it once. You don't simply—" She stopped. She picked up the spoon again, not to eat, only to have something in her hand. "That isn't something people do." "It was something I could do," he said. She turned the spoon slowly. "Most people do what they are paid for and nothing further." "Yes," he said. "I know." She waited to see if he would continue, if he would explain himself or justify himself or soften what he had done by framing it differently. He did none of those things. He simply waited with her, and the room was quiet in the particular way it is quiet when two people are sharing it without performing anything for the other. She took another spoonful. The temperature of the food had stayed. She did not know how, whether he had thought of that, whether it was intention or luck. But it was still warm, and she was still eating, and those were the only facts that seemed to require her attention at the moment. There was something building in the silence between them that she did not have a name for yet. She was a woman who preferred to name things immediately, to categorize and contain. The fact that she could not name this made it more interesting to her than almost anything had been in a very long time. She set the spoon down for a moment, not because she was finished, but because she needed to be still. Outside the tall windows, the grounds were settling into the particular blue-gray of late afternoon, the hour when everything on the estate looked like a photograph of itself, rather than a living place. She had always noticed that hour and never known what to do with it. It arrived every day, and she let it pass every day, and somehow that had never struck her as a loss until right now, sitting here in her bedroom with a bowl of warm soup and a man who had made it without being asked. She looked at him again. He was not watching her eat. That was the thing she kept returning to. He was facing slightly away, as though giving her the room, as though her hunger were a private thing that deserved its own space. No one did that. People watched her. People catalogued her reactions, measured her approval, angled themselves toward whatever response they hoped to produce. This man was simply present in the room without leaning on her attention. She picked up the spoon again. "How long have you known about the doctor's concern?" she asked. 3 days, he said. 3 days. She processed this quietly. That meant he had known before she had decided to notice it herself. That meant he had been carrying a piece of information that was entirely hers, and had not used it to approach her, or to recommend himself to her attention, or to position himself as someone she should be grateful to. He had simply acted when he was able to act. "You could have told someone," she said, "another member of the household." I thought about it, he admitted. And? He was quiet for a moment. I thought whoever you told might repeat it in a way that made it about something other than the food. She understood what he meant without requiring elaboration. Information in a household like hers did not stay simple. It accumulated weight, became currency, was spent by people who needed leverage or favor, or the brief pleasure of knowing something. He had understood this about the place she lived in, and he had protected her from it. And he had done so without calling it protection. She found that more remarkable than the cooking. You make decisions like someone who has had to think carefully, she said. He turned toward her slightly. There was something in his face that shifted. Not pain exactly, more like recognition, as though she had said something that touched a truth he lived with but did not often hear spoken aloud. I have, he said simply. She wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to understand the weight that lived just behind that answer, because she could feel it was considerable, and because she was, in this moment, more genuinely curious about another person than she could remember being in a very long time. But she did not ask. Not yet. Instead, she finished the soup, and the warmth of it moved through her like something slowly returning, and she sat with the question and let it wait. She set the bowl down carefully, as though the gesture required more attention than it deserved. The room had grown quieter in the way that rooms do when two people have stopped filling the silence with necessary speech and have arrived instead at something more uncertain. He collected the bowl without asking whether she was finished. She noticed this, the small, practiced assumption that did not presume too much, only recognized the obvious. She had eaten every drop. There was nothing left to pretend about. You should sleep, he said. It was not a command. It was not quite a suggestion either. It occupied some space between the two, and she recognized it as the voice of someone who had said similar things to a child, not ordering, not pleading, simply stating what was true and trusting the other person to receive it. I don't sleep well, she said. He nodded, as though this was not a surprise. She looked at him standing there in the half-light of the room she had always found beautiful and had never found restful. And she thought about how strange it was that a person could fill a space differently than furniture or airt or the carefully chosen objects she had placed in every corner of this house to make it feel like something. None of those things had made it feel like this, whatever this was. The soup helped, she said. It came out plainly, without decoration, which was not how she usually spoke. She was accustomed to finding better words, more guarded words, words that gave something while keeping the real thing back. This was just the truth. He looked at her for a moment. Good, he said. She wanted to press further. She wanted to ask about the weight she had felt behind his answer earlier, the careful decisions he had mentioned, the life that had trained him to think the way he did. She had never been a person who let questions rest easily. She ran a company. She resolved ambiguities for a living. The habit of wanting to know was not something she set aside at the end of a workday. But she also recognized, with some surprise, that she did not want to extract information from him. She wanted him to offer it. The distinction mattered more than she would have expected. Will you stay? She said, and then immediately clarified, while I try to sleep, in the chair. I'm not asking for anything unusual. She heard how it sounded and felt a brief, unfamiliar heat in her face. He did not make it strange. He simply moved the chair slightly closer to the window, the way a person does when they are settling in for a while, and sat down with the quiet ease of someone who had kept vigil before, for reasons he had not yet explained. She lay back against the pillows and looked at the ceiling and thought that she had not asked anyone to stay in a very long time. Outside, the city continued without her. In here, something else was happening, though she could not yet name what it was. She did not sleep immediately. That would have been too simple, and nothing about the last several days had been simple. Instead, she lay with her eyes half open and watched the shape of him in the chair. The way he sat without restlessness, without the particular performance of patience that people put on when they believed they were being observed. He was not performing. He was simply there, his forearms resting on his knees, his attention directed somewhere toward the middle distance, the way a person looks when their thoughts are neither urgent nor absent. She found herself noticing small things, the way his shoulders had dropped from where they had been held all evening, the way his breathing had settled into something slower and more deliberate, as though the room itself were asking him to be quieter than usual. She wondered what he thought about in moments like this. She wondered if he was thinking about her at all, or if his mind had gone somewhere entirely private, to the place where people kept whatever they could not say in ordinary conversation. She closed her eyes. The city outside the window made its low, continuous sound. Not loud, not intrusive, just the evidence of everything continuing in its usual way, regardless of what happened inside these walls. She had always found that sound vaguely reassuring. The world did not pause for her difficulty. In some moods she had resented that. Tonight it felt more like company. She thought about what she had said. "Will you stay?" 3 words delivered with the precision of someone who had immediately wanted to retrieve them. She had clarified instantly, offering him the architectural escape of "in the chair." Nothing unusual, as though the explanation could reduce what the request had actually meant. She suspected he had understood what it meant anyway. He had not made it strange, which was the particular grace of people who understood something and chose not to display the understanding. She had not asked anyone to stay in so long that she could not locate the last time without effort. There had been other people. There had been other rooms. But staying, the way she meant it, staying as its own complete act, rather than as a consequence of something else, that had not happened in years, maybe longer. She exhaled slowly. At some point, without deciding to, she slept. When she surfaced briefly sometime later, not fully awake, just close enough to register the room, the chair was still occupied. He had not moved to something more comfortable. He had not left when the situation became less dramatic and therefore easier to leave. The lamp by the window was low. Outside, the city had grown quieter in the way it only did past a certain hour. She did not speak. She did not need to. She let herself sink back into the dark, carrying something she had not arrived at this evening with. The plain, unfamiliar knowledge that someone had stayed not because they were asked to, but because staying was the right thing to do. She woke properly when the light had changed. Not the lamplight, that had been extinguished at some point, carefully, without waking her, but the early gray that came through the curtains before the city remembered to be loud again. She lay still for a moment, letting the room come back to her slowly. The chair by the window was empty. He had gone. She was surprised by how immediately she noticed. She lay there another minute, taking stock of what was different. She was not cold. Sometime in the night, someone had drawn the second blanket up from the foot of the bed and laid it over her without disturbing her. The water glass on the nightstand had been refilled. These small things, performed without announcement, without credit, without anything asked in return, they registered as clearly as if they had been spoken aloud. She got up carefully, found her robe, and walked through the apartment in the early quiet. The small table where he had set the meal the night before had been cleared. The makeshift arrangement he had constructed in her dressing room, the portable burner, the covered dishes, the careful borrowed order of it, was gone entirely, as though it had never existed. He had dismantled it and removed it before dawn, leaving no trace of the inconvenience, only the fact that it had happened. She stood in the empty space for a long moment. Then she went to the window with her coffee, made herself this time simply from what was already in the kitchen, and watched the city begin. She did not think about the word servant. She did not think about appropriate distance or the correct structure of her household or what it meant for her authority that she had cried in front of him. Those thoughts tried to arrive. She recognized them as old furniture, familiar shapes she had arranged and rearranged for years to fill rooms that otherwise felt too open. She set them aside. What she returned to instead was simpler. He had heard something she had not said loudly. He had done something about it without asking for permission or praise. He had stayed when staying was inconvenient. He had left before she woke so that she would not feel watched. Every single thing he had done had been calibrated toward her comfort and away from his own visibility. She had spent a very long time in rooms full of people who did the opposite. She finished her coffee and set the cup down and stood there in the gray morning light with the city coming alive below her. And she understood, without drama, without ceremony, in the plain and ordinary way that real things tend to arrive, that something had changed last night. Not because a meal was cooked, not because she had wept, but because for a few hours she had been simply and completely seen, and she had not turned away. Neither had he. The rest, she thought, would follow.